I think I want to work for you, Ari.
Thanks, Will.
But yeah, hang on, based on billable hours. No, I'm joking.
No. Oh, no, trust me. I've been a consultant forever. I'm done with that.
I'm just kidding.
No,
Well, hello and welcome to the stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy consultant, doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And today we are thrilled to be joined by Ari Raivetz, who is the founder and CEO of Transcend. Ari, good to see you, my man. Come in. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Great to see you. So we've got lots and lots we want to talk to you about. Not only kind of, I think, growing a company during a pandemic, which is, a pretty incredible feat. You've successfully raised money. But I think to kind of get going then, your origin story of how Transcend was born, the genesis, we can maybe go back to your kind of previous life, if you like, within Organica. Maybe give us a bit of context on kind of the initial idea for where your company came from.
Sure. So it actually probably, the origin story may go back even further than Organica. So, because I came from the enterprise software industry. So in the pre-water part of my career, I worked in ERP and supply chain software, automating, accounting and supply chain processes. And then I did CRM software for a while, so automating sales and marketing processes, mostly for software companies. And went to business school for a while. And then after that, worked as an equity analyst for a little bit and kind of found my way to the water industry as a venture investor. So I saw a lot of startups for 3 years, and I saw a lot of the challenges that they had breaking in new technologies into this industry. And one of them convinced me to run the company, and that was Organica, my prior company to Transcend. So Organica was this really interesting wastewater recycling technology. Doesn't look like a wastewater plant. It looks like a botanical garden, no odor. You can put it right in the middle of a city. And so instead of talking about like circular economy on a PowerPoint slide, you can actually do it because you're treating the water, right next to people. So I come in as CEO of this company, moved to Budapest, Hungary from the US. And, I realized that it's taking us like a month, hundreds and hundreds of hours to put together a design just to bid on a project. 5 different people, multiple iterations from clients, and going from kind of like the investor's high chair into like the day-to-day guts of the company, you start to see, okay, this is why growing, a business in water is so difficult. One of the reasons anyway. And so came up with the idea to automate that process using a software platform. And that's kind of how the original kind of where the idea came from for the Transcend design generator software.
Ari, a quick question, and maybe it's a long answer, but your transition into the water sector, I mean, what was the aha that, I'm going to invest in Organica and I'm going to go be the CEO? I mean, did you see this as potentially a growth area, or did you see it as something that had appeal beyond, the market pull for something like that? So I'm always fascinated by how people make that decision to say, this whole water thing, it might be important and I really want to put my money into it. And then the next step is I want to be part of it from an operational perspective.
So I was a tech guy, I did my own startup for a year after undergrad and worked in the software industry. After I got my MBA, I had a lot of loans and I went to work as an equity analyst, and I covered all the oil and gas companies when they first started fracking for natural gas.
Oh, yeah.
And we took a lot of them public. I mean, raised hundreds of billions of dollars for companies like Chesapeake, Anadarko, all the big independent E&P companies. I went on to cover the oil refiners, the dry bulk shipping companies, pretty much anyone who's destroying the planet. That was my coverage universe.
Ari,
Does your family?
Yeah.
When we spoke previously, you said that you'd amassed a sort of ecological debt, right? Not directly with your own hands, but in terms of helping fossil fuel oil and gas companies raise significant capital and actually coming into the water industry. And the work with Organica was the aha moment to see actually we're solving a major problem here, a major challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not adding to it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I had this debt, and I still do, to the planet for all that money that we raised for the oil and gas companies and everyone else, and I'm still paying it back. That's how I got into water as an investor, and then I saw that I could have a bigger impact, running a business with Organica, and now trying to bring design automation to the industry, and kind of help speed the adoption of lots of innovative technologies, not just one single one like I did at Organica.
I think you summarized Organica really succinctly as these. It's not often you would apply the word beautiful to wastewater treatment plants, but having covered them in my time as editor of WWI magazine and looking at the origin story of Organica, these things are beautifully designed, right? You mentioned like botanical gardens with fish actually in city, not out of sight, out of mind, miles away from the urban environment. It completely rethinks wastewater treatment. And I think the interesting part of this story is that Transcend was kind of incubated whilst you were still in Organica. So when you could launch and separate, you could really hit the ground running.
Exactly. So, it was born out of a real problem. I mean, I think Organica, when I joined, was like 20 reference plants and bidding on like one project a month because of that bottleneck. And I saw that in this industry, you got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince. And it was taking us a month, to do that, right? So we built this software platform, completely automated the preliminary engineering process, producing process flow diagrams and mass balance calculations, P&IDs and equipment lists, and then 3D visualizations of these beautiful wastewater plants. And overnight, we went from a 3-week response time to a 4-hour response time.
Wow.
We could bid on as many projects as we wanted to. We went from doing 1 or 2 a month to like 30 plus per month. When a client wanted to change something, which inevitably 5-10 times they want to change something as you're going through the sales cycle, you could just change one parameter, rerun that design, and immediately send it to them. You could model the competition, and so you could kind of figure out, where do I have an advantage or do I not have an advantage, so I shouldn't bid on this project. So it just became such a strategic tool from a sales and growth point of view. And I think, Organica grew from 30 reference plants to over 120 within a 4-year period of time once it started using the software. So it was really, a significant driver of growth for the business.
That's amazing.
So the idea then comes, right? Like if it can help this, really innovative but small, Hungarian startup, I mean, what could it do for this industry where, when I was investing, I saw hundreds of startups that were struggling to break in and probably face similar bottlenecks. And not just for the technology suppliers, but for the utilities and the engineering firms when they're going through capital planning, and inevitably they're not considering most of these new technologies and new options and more sustainable design approaches.
Ari, when you launched Transcend, actually before you launched, how much thought did you give to the human side of this? So, creating Transcend within Organica, now that's like straightforward. That's a no-brainer. That's a huge competitive advantage. But launching Transcend, where your customer is potentially a consulting engineer that sells hours, and you're smiling. Could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, did you anticipate not pushback, but the challenge of getting the human capital side of the equation to say, yeah, I got a lousy business model, and I got to rethink it?
Yeah, I thought about it a lot, and I think when we decided to spin out and kind of raise our first institutional capital, it was clearly identified as this is the number one risk, but it's something that has to change.
Right.
Because as technology evolves, and if software evolves to a point where you can evaluate 40 or 50 options in a capital planning process as opposed to one or two, that gets you a more efficient outcome. Mm-hmm. You can now measure these uncertainties related to climate change when you design. You can evaluate new technologies, and you don't have to spend all those really, costly hours to do that. And that ultimately benefits society as a whole. And ultimately the utilities are going to be the ones who, when that technology does kind of come to fruition, are going to want to use that. So it was very clear to me, kind of like, I came from ERP and CRM. And when I was 23 years old, I used to sit in meetings with procurement professionals who were concerned that this software would take their job. And then later with marketing professionals that were concerned that CRM would take their job. And you see that in both those sectors, we got more efficient, there's more jobs, there's more employment. What's kind of unifying is that we've used our minds, our creativity, our analytical skills. We've taken it to a new level. So the technology enables us to be more efficient and kind of use our brains, maximize the power of them. And so, that same kind of transition here, right? That's the goal.
Yeah. So you've been through this multiple times in terms of, launching a software solution that changes the business model for, procurement, supply chain people, sales, business development, and so on. That's really interesting. That's a great pedigree in terms of thinking about, okay, we know how this is going to play out with Transcend, and we're going to be prepared to make the value proposition, or just tell people it's going to happen one way or another. Hold on to your seat.
Do you think part of the role, Ari, is kind of education from your sides? I mean, because it's a really interesting position you're in, because you're ultimately selling to the companies you're inevitably disrupting, right? So as we've talked about it, you mentioned by repositioning those skilled, creative, senior engineers to other parts of the business where their time could be better spent, actually automation, AI, machine learning can do certain tasks quicker and autonomously, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Education is a huge part of it. We actually are using the software at a course at the University of Michigan this year. So the students in that class are using the software, and instead of just learning how to design, they're actually analyzing the outcomes from the designs and using that knowledge to say, okay, well, what decisions did we make in our inputs that drove these outcomes? So it really speeds up that learning process. And we see a lot of our customers actually use the software to train their team. But it is very much a behavior change. I don't want to create the impression that it's easy. I mean, engineers don't change easily. That's just the reality of engineers.
You're talking about culture change as well, right? Which, as we know, we often talk about. It's not just the technology or the software or the hardware. It's actually the ingrained culture and the kind of the status quo can be the biggest challenge to implementation sometimes, right?
That is always our biggest challenge. It's really interesting. I mean, you talk to younger engineers, people that, graduated in the past 5 to 10 years and kind of are just starting out in the industry. And they're just so frustrated. Often they're frustrated with, why am I spending my time trying to find an old design from a similar plant, copy and pasting, putting together these documents. Like I became an engineer to solve problems, not to, create these documentation packages and then revise them 15 times. And they see our product and they realize that, hey, now I can do that, right? I can actually run 15 designs and spend my time analyzing which one is better and how's this design going to respond to higher temperatures, population changes, rising sea levels, and, snow in Texas, right? I mean, all of these changes that we're seeing. So,
you made me smile. When I started my career, that was the MO. It's like, okay, what's the go by? So a new project, and it has to be similar to a previous project. So just go find the report for something similar, the go by. And it's archaic that it's still going on.
It is. And with all this money that's being spent on infrastructure, with the infrastructure bill that passed in the US and so many other places around the world over the next 5-10 years, as we kind of build our next generation of infrastructure to combat climate change. I mean, it has to change, because the end result of that is just a suboptimal outcome. That's why we don't see as much innovation. One of the reasons why we don't see as much innovation in this industry as those of us in the industry believe there should be. So
it's another great example of an outsider disrupting the sector. So, and I take it as a compliment, Ari, but you came from a different place and you looked at it and said, everything's broken here. And why can't we, as opposed to get me the go by and we'll just use it over and over again. So that's interesting.
So, Ari, you mentioned about conversations you've had with young engineers. Ultimately, you're in a stage of growth now. You've secured significant investment and you're having to hire your own young, talented team. But largely, this has been done during a pandemic, right? So a lot of it has to have been done virtually. So just talk us through how that's kind of played out for you. I'm really interested to know, because some software as a service companies we start to in the UK, often the new employees have only, especially in the last year, just known their teammates virtually. They literally come in, hired, trained into the team, and then the continued work has just been remotely. So I'd love to kind of get your take on how that's been and how and obviously now things are opening up. So.
Yeah, so we started Transcend. We spun out from Organica in December 2019. If you'd asked me then, I would have probably said I'm going to spend 2/3 of my time on the road in 2020. We have a software development team in Hungary, and we have people all over the US from a customer facing point of view. And then all of a sudden we were just locked down. So it's been a very interesting experience building a company this way. Even hiring your HR director on a Zoom call, right? And then that person, driving the hiring decisions. And I didn't meet a lot of people on the team until mid 2021. So we with travel restrictions and everything, we had a significant, delay in being able to travel to Europe. What we're trying to do is build a culture that just accepts the fact that you're going to be on video frequently and you're not going to be in person as much. And so I think the key is a dedicated effort focused on that. Thinking about it on a regular basis, having WhatsApp groups, having kind of virtual events, We certainly spend more on travel now that things are starting to open up again, fingers crossed. But it is, you can't replace in-person interaction. There's just no way to do it, at least not yet. So
I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, that you've baked that into the culture from the start. It's not as if you've got a company for 10 years that's been built, used to meeting as a kind of startup, scale up, and then you've had to suddenly go to remote. As people are joining remote, they're used to that culture. So it's kind of from the foundations of what you're building.
Right.
It's that kind of,
Every business process is built for remote onboarding and, doing things remotely from the very beginning, from the start of the company. It is a cloud-based software solution, so that helps. It's really it's been kind of eye-opening. Sometimes you meet people for the first time when you've been on video calls for a year, and they're 6'4" or 5'2", right? And it's like
you're talking about Tom, right?
I met someone in London the other day, and they said, "You seem so much shorter on Zoom." I'm like, well, surprisingly, I'm not stood up with like a couple of meter sticks next to me, right? Yeah, but you're absolutely right. You after dealing with people for a certain amount of time, you have a perception of how tall they are, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also it's become a competitive advantage in some ways from a hiring point of view, because it's gotten to a point where we just say, you know what, we're going to hire the best person wherever they are.
Right.
We don't care where they are, right? And we have all the processes and systems set up, even to deal with, time zones that are 9 or 10 hours apart. And you make that work. You get really talented people, and they can live a better quality of life. So, that's been helpful. And as we grow and have to add talent, it's been an important advantage, I think.
Yeah, it's changed the kind of the rules of engagement when it comes to kind of new starters, not even having people to relocate to where your head office is within a commutable distance. They can often start much quicker because they're remote based. So yeah, it's been some things in that respect have definitely improved. So where do you sort of see this going then, Ari? Because I know you've talked about previously going beyond water, working with companies on the tech side in MBR. What's kind of your game plan for the next couple of years?
And from a long-term point of view, the vision is that capital planning and preliminary design, conceptual design processes, not just for water infrastructure, but for all kinds of built infrastructure, should use a software platform like Transcend to evaluate multiple options and deal with all the kind of rapidly changing uncertainties that climate change brings. And then in the end, we adopt new technologies faster, and we build infrastructure that's more resilient to deal with these changes in the environment that are kind of inevitable. So within water, we are seeing some really interesting things happening this year, where utilities, as they have all this influx of capital and are starting to think about spending it, master plan updates and capital planning exercises for specific facilities, they're coming to us more and more. And they're saying, if this software can help me evaluate all of these options, can you work with our engineering partner to do that? Or in some cases, in certain utilities that have large in-house engineering firms, want to take that work on themselves. And so that's definitely happening faster than we probably expected when we started Transcend. Utilities aren't usually the first ones to adopt new technologies, but
not stereotyping, of course, but
so this could be like, one of the taglines, engineers don't innovate fast, utilities don't, we won't do that to you, Ari, but
you've got to kiss a lot of frogs, that type of thing. Yeah.
There's no shortage of, iconic taglines here, but Ari, are you factoring in climate change scenarios into your design considerations? So you're looking at okay, this is what the future is going to look like, not the past.
Yeah, I mean, here's an example, right? So utilities doing a master plan update somewhere in the southeastern US. Typically, when they do a master plan update for this wastewater facility, they'd look at 2 or 3 different scenarios, and they'd pay an engineering firm to do that work. We're working now on a cooperation where working with the utility and an engineering firm, and they're going to look at 4 or 5 different process configurations. And then within each of those process configurations, 7 or 8 different scenarios from a flow, a temperature, a loading point of view. And our software will generate, a complete design package for all 30 plus of those runs.
That's amazing. Amazing.
Just think about all the billable hours that's saving.
But think about it like this, though. But Tom, think about it like this. So from the engineering firm's perspective, they're actually billing the same thing that they were going to bill the client before.
Right.
But now the client's getting tremendous value because they're evaluating 30 scenarios, and they're spending those hours not just doing the drawings, but actually analyzing the outcomes and saying, what is the best choice I can make for this plant? They're able to look at the civil drawings, they're able to look at the mechanical equipment and kind of the cost of upgrading it and the operating cost of that equipment, and then all the process kind of risk and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big change. So
it's greater value, greater content, greater insight, greater thought process for the same dollar or similar. That's really interesting. So, sort of the notion that, it's just fewer billable hours, you flip it on its head and say, well, it's greater value creation because you have a better toolkit as opposed to, I can't bill the hour. Well, you can bill the same hour. You're just delivering more to your client.
It's generating a more comprehensive list of options as part of the playbook at the end of the project, right?
Right. Yeah. And the rate case, because at the end of the day, who pays for this stuff? Right. I mean, we pay for it. And that master plan update is going to go to a rate case, and they're going to have to approve some kind of change in the rate to support that capital investment. Obviously, some of that money is coming from the infrastructure bill. But so now you've actually really done, a comprehensive analysis that you can present in that rate case and the public benefits. And you know what? The engineering firm actually is having fun with it because they're analyzing instead of, drawing. So go ahead.
There's a former Deloitte colleague was a co-author on a book, Technology Fallacy, and Tom's heard me say this, but it's based on an absolutely enormous survey of stakeholders that are engaged in digital transformation. And one of the conclusions that I really get stuck on all the time in a good way is that you can attract and retain talent if you are embedding digital solutions into your business. So, to your early point about young professionals, young engineers that look at the toolkit and say, I can't deal with this anymore, I'm going to go do something else. You counter that with, no, here's a digital toolkit, go run with it and be creative. I mean, that's appealing and that's sticky in terms of, talent acquisition and retention. Really fascinating, Ari.
I think it goes even further, right, in terms of younger generations wanting to work for a company with purpose, with thinking about the impacts of climate change in the future and having access to these state-of-the-art tools. And all of that is like this perfect storm to help attract and retain young talent as well, right?
One other point about digital and talent is that one of the other conclusions or findings from the study was that it's multi-generational. So yes, it probably appeals more to young professionals, but even professionals that have been around for a while that, love what they do, they get excited about learning and having a different set of toolkits to deliver value.
that is always the most rewarding experience, at least for me personally. And I've seen it in this example I'm talking about where, someone who's been around the industry for 40 plus years, they actually would like to evaluate some different options and technologies, for a side stream treatment to deal with some of the uncertainty with flow rates and population change, but they just, they've been hamstrung literally for decades. Right. They don't have the capacity to do that within the hours that they've been allotted for this update. And we've kind of released the shackles on that. And so now we're seeing a flow of ideas. Well, what if we tried this? And, it's now kind of releasing. And so, I expect we're going to be doing a lot more of this, kind of working with utilities and engineering firms in collaboration around these kind of studies. So
I think it's really interesting. Ari, when we did the interview for Aquatech Online, we kind of concluded and said that although obviously Transcend is a software as a service offering its software, essentially how you're positioning this to link between consulting engineers and utilities is more of a kind of enabler. Would you say that's a kind of more accurate description of what you're trying to build here, right? To help overcome those bottlenecks that can stop innovation happening.
Very accurate. And then I'd add a third element to that triangle that we're trying to enable, which is the technology OEMs. Even in this example that I shared, there's 3 or 4 technologies that they want to evaluate. And so now we're bringing the OEMs into that picture. Their product is going to be in the software. And then we're also building a relationship with them so that we can help them kind of do what Organica did, and get their technology out there much more broadly. So we're trying to enable that triangle of the utility really at the top of it, and then the technology OEM and the engineering firm to get to this better outcome, more innovative, more resilient outcome.
Amazing. Well, Ari, thanks. Great to hear from you again and hear that everything's going so well. And especially your origin story from Organica and spinning out Transcend is always good to catch up. And I think, Will, whenever we talk about the digital leaders that are disrupting, Ari, you're a name that often springs to mind. So, continue doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you both. I enjoyed it.
Great work. And I think I want to work for you, Ari.
Thanks, Will.
But hang on, based on billable hours. No, I'm joking.
No. Oh, no. Trust me. I've been a consultant forever. I'm done with that.
I'm just kidding.
No, this is really unique in the marketplace. And I really love how you think about value in terms of what you're delivering and shaking things up. It's awesome work. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, keep doing what you're doing, Aaron. Great stuff. Well,
good.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, and we'll speak to you soon.
Okay, great.
We'll see you soon.
We'll see you in person soon.
Like for real.
For sure.
All right. Thank you, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thanks.